That's a lot more honest, isn't it? You're kind of walking with that person. And hopefully you've then brought them something that is helpful to them. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. I don't know what's going to happen. But I'm here with you now. I see your suffering. I'll continue to pray for you. I pray that God gives you strength, maybe rather than you're strong enough to take this, God doesn't give us more than we can bear, right? So there are ways to flip it on its head. And again, that one sheet I gave you hopefully has some of these suggestions in there. I didn't put them all. Let me pause for a minute. I see there's a question back here, and then I'll talk a little bit more. I've already kind of segued into some of the hard things that come up, especially with life-threatening diagnoses or cancer, things like that.
I'm not sure I see the difference in what you're saying is don't say theology. And one thing you said, don't tell them that God loves you, because that's theology. But then on the other hand, you say, tell them that God will be with you. So how is that different?
So what I was saying, in the face of somebody feeling like God hates them and is punishing them, at that moment telling them that God loves them is not helpful. In another moment, telling them that God is with them might be helpful. But in that moment, I needed to help the person express what they were feeling. They felt abandoned by God. They didn't feel like God loved them. So it's not my job to try to dismiss what they're saying and make them feel better. It's our job in that moment. Hopefully through our presence, we're showing them that God loves them, right? We're showing them that God cares because we're there. But we need to pay attention to the deepest things they're saying and respond there, start there. So you see the difference? It is subtle, you're right, it's hard. If people are feeling abandoned by God, frankly, and I'll talk a little bit about that, I probably wouldn't say God is here with you. Right? So it depends on what they're saying. If people are feeling anxious but not abandoned by God, then you want to say, oh, I see you're worried, but I'm here with you. Somehow I know God will be with you on the journey. So it all depends on what they're bringing to you. Other comments or reflections or quick questions? Are you just waving back there? So, for people who have serious illness, and I actually think at the rehab center, at what's that nursing home you guys go to? Warren Bar. I think people have these same things going on. You may not always know it, but we send cancer patients to the rehab center all the time. People have just gotten a diagnosis that they're going to be quadriplegic for the rest of their life. I mean, these are serious things, right? So though I'm mostly going to talk out of the experience of oncology patients and folks with life-threatening illness, just again, see if you can apply this a little bit more broadly. But there's some common spiritual struggles that come up, and I can't talk about them all because we could be here all night. But I want to just mention a few, because I think these are the hard questions that often kind of get put into your face and cause you to go, what do I say? And the first one is that big one, like, loss of purpose. Why me, right? Isn't there the breast cancer used to be why me? Because lots of people, when they get a new diagnosis, and often no matter how strong their faith is, suffering leads people to ask, to wonder, why is this happening? What have I done? And is there a bigger reason or purpose to this? Human beings want to make sense of things. I think that's kind of how we stay afloat and order the world a little bit. And so even when there isn't an explanation, people will think and feel like, I must have done something, start looking back at their past, and it doesn't all add up, but still they question, they cry out, they ask. And this is back to the lament. When people get a new diagnosis or a big diagnosis, of course they're going to say, why me? To wonder why this is happening. It just makes perfect sense. So again, our job, I think, if you hear that big question, is not to say, oh, God doesn't send suffering upon people, he doesn't cause illness, or, well, you did smoke all your life, right? And that's why you got lung cancer. I know you wouldn't say that. But is to, again, help them continue to ask the question. So I always normalize it for them. It makes sense that you would ask, why me, right? You're only 23 years old. You've barely begun to live. it seems unjust, unfair. Of course you're mad. Of course you're angry. Oh my goodness, how could you not be? So I try to normalize their feeling. And sometimes I even use things like, I've heard lots of other patients, when they receive this kind of news, ask the same question. Are you getting any answers? So then that's the second step, is to ask them. Not you tell them why this is happening, or what you think, or your theology, or your answer, but to go back to them. It's about them, not us. Do you have any idea why this is happening? I once had a gang member, when I worked in hospice care, start asking this question. And I have to say, had I said something to him, nice and polite, like, God isn't causing you to suffer, there's no, you didn't do anything to deserve this, I would have missed an opportunity there, because actually he had a big burden he was carrying about things that he'd done that were really wrong, that he was feeling that he was being punished for. And it led to incredible spiritual growth and peace and making amends. So again, people ask these questions sometimes because there is no answer. And you just need to put your hands up and say, oh my heavens, why is this happening? This is shocking, right? I think it's okay in those situations to say something like, I use this all the time. I'm not going to insult you with some easy answer. I don't know why. I don't know why. These are big questions you're asking. But I'm hearing you're in shock, I'm hearing you're upset, and I'm here with you now. Reassure them, that you're there. It seems like not a lot, but frankly, it's helpful. It's probably the most helpful response. I wish I had the answers. I sometimes actually confess to folks that I have a very long list for when I meet God face to face, because there's lots of things on this earth that don't add up. And I know probably when I get there, it'll all make sense to me. At least that's what we're told, right? But I don't get it. I mean, do you get why there's all this suffering and these horrible things happen? And we don't have the God's eye view. So telling people that God has a reason or a plan or a purpose in that moment when they're asking those big questions isn't very helpful. Now, what often happens is when you start getting them talking a little bit about, do you think there's any reason why? They'll go, I don't know why, but boy, my family certainly is coming around a lot more, and my two brothers that never spoke to each other are now talking to each other. Maybe that's part of the purpose here. So people often start discovering their own purpose, their own sense of reason, what this time might be about. The diagnosis brought me back to God, people will tell you. It was a wake-up call. So see what they answer, right? If you ask them, and maybe with time again, they'll start to come to their own sense of purpose and meaning. And believe it or not, having some sense of purpose or meaning in this, why is this happening? It's not just for naught, it's not in vain, actually helps people get through treatment and suffering and a lot. So that's the first big one that comes up a lot. The second one is, and I mentioned this a little bit before, but anger, a sense of anger or injustice or abandonment by God. Some of you know this lovely patient too, who fortunately is quite well right now, but I happened to be called in on the day when she got a really horrible diagnosis of cancer. And she looked at me when I introduced myself as the chaplain, and she said to me, "You can come in, but don't talk to me about Jesus and don't pray." We hit it off from the start. I'm like, okay, what do you need to talk about? I'm seeing you're having a really hard time. Tell me what's going on, right? It's okay that right then she felt mad at God. She was furious. She'd lived a good life. Job, right? Lived a good life, done all the right things, and she gets one of the worst diagnoses. It's horrible. I got to sit and lament with her and cry out and shake my fist and say things like, "You remind me of Job in the Bible. Isn't it great that book's in the Bible because it gives us permission to go, right?" The old Catholic mystic, St. John of the Cross, had a term for this period that people go through when they feel like God's not with them. The dark night of the soul, right? just wonder where. You're in this valley. God's not there. Hopefully you coming in maybe helps them, but people have to walk through that valley to get up to the other side sometimes. They have to go through their own wrestling with God. So again, normalizing what they're going through. Asking them to tell you more. Why are you so angry? Tell me how this is so hard. What feels so unfair about it? And interestingly enough, this is where I was wondering about offering. Do you still offer to give them communion or not? I think I might, and I might offer to pray, but I'd give them an out. I might say something like, you know, I brought communion with me. I'm the minister of care. I certainly would understand right now, given what you've said to me about, you know, kind of feeling like God's not with you, that you might not want to receive. But if you'd like to, I still have it here for you. And see what their response is. This same woman, she wouldn't let me pray with her, but she took communion every time the minister of care came, because that connected her and somehow reminded her. She just kept doing the act, right? Take communion. Somehow it shows you God's with you, even when you're feeling like God's not. So interesting, right? I want to leave time for discussion, so I'm going to make 2 more points here, 2 more spiritual struggle issues. This is the big one, and this is about hope. Christians are a people of hope always. But hope is not always in physical healing, miracles, and life here. Hope also just has many faces and many locations. Where people find hope is not only in the physical healing, though many people who are ill obviously are looking for it there. So when people get a new diagnosis of cancer or horrible heart disease or something like that, or find out they're going to be paralyzed, right? Especially with the big C, generation for the big C, right? Oh, that means I'm going to die. They're going to go there, right? It's not our place in that moment to tell them they're going to be well. We don't know that they're going to be well. They need to be able to look at that fear, right? I think for people who have an initial diagnosis like this or recurrent disease, a sense of despair and hopelessness and shock and even denial is to be expected, right? Don't you think? Like, either you're going to die and it's never going to get better, or, oh, I'm going to be just fine. Either way, right? Hope is a fragile thing. People are trying to hold on. They don't know what to hope for. They're all over the map when they hear news like that. And again, people need to process this. They need to be able to have all of this come up. What's interesting is, so sometimes you'll go into a room, an oncology floor, and people will have just started chemotherapy. It would seem logical that you could say, oh, you know, I so trust this is going to work, you're going to be well. But even then, you don't really know, do you? Is this a last-ditch chemo they're getting? Has the disease recurred? So it's tricky. Again, I would just say to them, what are you hoping for? They just started chemo, probably in order to go through it. They're hoping to be well and maybe find a cure. Sometimes maybe they're just hoping to buy a little good time. So ask, right? Don't assume again, just ask. You hear, oh, they just hung chemo for the first time. I just got a new diagnosis. Oh, that must be hard to hear. Looks like they have a plan. What are you hoping for? You think this is going to work? Rather than just saying, oh, great, I know you're going to be well, or the things that we want to do. During treatment, okay, so at any one time, it's hard to know what people are hoping for, right? Again, more quality time, more time. Some people, believe it or not, their hope lies in it being over. When people really, their illness is not going to go anywhere, and it's just going on and on. I have heard people, and when I was in hospice care, this was very true, praying to die. I just want this to end. What's the point now? I'm just ready. I've done everything I need to do. That's a form of hope, right? So again, I'm trying to give you a sense of hope comes in many forms. So especially the doctors, the oncologists are particularly bad at this. We want to give like this false hope, right? Here's one last chemo, go get a second opinion, do this, do that, because we don't want to let people down. We don't want to take away their hope. But if you can remember, and maybe this is a trick, that hope comes in many forms and faces, and start to explore what that looks like with people, you'll soon discover, again, unless they're in that initial hopeless stage, that there's lots of room for hope. One of the tricks that I use is trying to redirect people. So, okay, so you're hoping for the big miracle, right? You're still holding out for that. While you're waiting for that, since we don't know what God's going to do, I don't know what God's going to do, are there other things you're hoping for right now? And people will come up with things. I'm hoping to live to see a friend of mine, live to see his first great-grandchild be born the end of this month. He knows he's going to die. He's had a horrible disease for a long time, but that's what he's holding on for. What a great hope to have. I get to see my great-grandbaby, right? I hope to be able to get home. I hope to go to Alaska on a fishing trip. I hope to not be in pain, to not suffer anymore. And sometimes I hope that I will go to heaven and be with God. I hope my family's going to be okay. So lots of other kind of objects of hope, we call them, or places where people can put their hope. And again, the trick is to say, oh, I so wish that happens. I so hope you get that miracle. Wouldn't that be incredible? So people say, do you think God's going to give me the miracle? Oh, wouldn't that just be something? Again, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know what God's going to do. Tell me what your miracle would look like, I sometimes say. Right? Because I don't want to take that away from them. On the other hand, I'm not saying, yes, God performs miracles. I've seen, when I was down in South America, that God sends miracles if you just pray harder, if you just do this, if you just do that. Because I don't know. So it's a tricky kind of way, again, of just inviting people to talk more. And sometimes what happens when people are hoping for a miracle, what I've seen, is that they themselves then start grieving and going, oh, but you know what? I am just so sick. They've tried everything. I really think it's my time. And they start grieving and come to a place of acceptance and peace. Not always. Resist the temptation to share your miracle stories, please. Really, really, it's not all that helpful to people. I know we believe in them, you've seen them, unless they specifically ask you. But sometimes what we do, the person's just finally gotten to a place of acceptance that they're going to die, that this illness is not curable. And then the doctor comes in and offers another clinical trial drug, a last-ditch whatever. Or we come in and say, well, don't give up, pray for a miracle. And it's like they've moved here, and we put them all the way back here, and then they have to go through all this hard work again to get to the place of acceptance. And maybe in the meantime, we've robbed them of the time and the space they need to do spiritual work, to ask for forgiveness, to take care of unfinished business at home with their family, right? So again, just be sensitive to that timing, especially when it's around very serious illness and what people are looking for. I want to mention one last, since we're on the topic of death, and I kind of really wanted to be able to cover that because I know some of you have had the unfortunate experience, not just in Prentice with oncology patients or palliative care patients, but over in Feinberg, of walking into a room and learning that the person was just told that they have several days to live or that they're going to die, or the family had just learned, and you're like, what do I do now? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that time. If the person is awake and alert, often you may encounter them alone even, and they'll start talking about the fear that they have of dying, or you can see that. I think that people are afraid of a lot of things as they're dying, even if they're super faithful people. And sometimes it has nothing to do with faith pieces. What could they be afraid of? They could be afraid that they're going to suffer, that they're going to suffocate, that they'll be alone, that their family won't be okay, that they can't handle it emotionally. All these people coming to say goodbye and crying all the time, and it's just overwhelming, right? And sometimes they're afraid for their soul. So I think asking if you find people afraid or families afraid. I know people are afraid of a lot of different things as they're facing this time. Can you tell me more about what you're afraid of? Right? Offer to stay with them, obviously, if people seem afraid or agitated. calming presence, breathing, holding their hand, asking them if it would help to pray or read the Psalms or say the Rosary or something that could be of kind of a comforting nature to them, but asking them if that would help. And if they express salvation concerns, I had a woman the other day just absolutely petrified. She'd lived a horrible life. She's going to go to hell. I mean, she was terrified, terrified. Call us. That's what we're trained to work with. Or call, or ask them. Don't suggest a priest, because I don't know that people always, oh, you need to see a priest, right? That's, again, that advice giving. That's that your theology, what you think they need to ask. Some people, when they're asking these kinds of questions, find it helpful to talk to a member of the clergy or their own priest. Would that be helpful right now? See the difference? Rather than telling them what they should do, oh, you need to go to confession and get the last rites, and all these things that we think they need to do, which maybe they do need to do, and that will bring them great peace. But instead of dictating, ask, would that be helpful? Suggest options. We have chaplains, we have a priest, would that be helpful? And again, you walk in and the person's no longer conscious and the family tells you this news, what would you do? I'm really sorry to hear that, I didn't know. Boy, what a loving group of family you have around here. She's so blessed to have you here with them, with her. Would it be helpful to pray? Would communion be helpful now? Would it be helpful, since they're Catholic, to have a priest come during this time? Has anyone asked you that? Tell me about your loved one. I see he's very loved. Tell me what he was like. Right? Get him talking. The simple things that you do with any friend or family member who you encountered. So I know it throws you off when you first walk in, right? It's like, ugh, because you're not expecting it. But again, it's that, okay, step back. What do they need? Help me sense this, Lord. What do they need here? If people ask you about heaven, do you think we're really going to see Aunt Mary when I get over there? What do you think heaven's going to be like? Again, I try to avoid, and I'm going to invite you to avoid giving the rote answers, the answers that we got in our catechism or that we read or that are taught to us, and ask, what do you think it will be like? What do you hope it will be like? I don't know, I've never been there, right? What do we think a lot of things, we're taught a lot of things, but what could it be like? And that again gets people thinking about what they're really going to miss is their family, and so they really are hoping that there's going to be family there for them. So it accomplishes two things at once, and they're able to maybe have some more peace and this image in their head. Another thing, and I'll stop here with this, that I often say to people in the face of these many unknowns is something like, I don't know what it will be like, but what I do know is who our God is. Can you tell me about what you know about our God? And it's fascinating. So instead of the worries about, people don't really worry, am I going to have a robe? Am I going to go to hell? But more the questions like, are we going to, if I was married before, am I going to be with that wife or the second wife or whatever might come up? Those people start all these details and they're just nervous about this unknown thing, right? I often just take them back and I say, there's so many unknowns, but I know who our God is. He's faithful, he's constant, he's been with us throughout our life, he's a God of love, he's a God of life. We come from him and we return to him. So something simple like that instead of, again, trying to conjecture and answer. All right, I'm going to stop. Questions, comments, things, maybe other scenarios or times that have come up that you struggle with that you'd like to share a little bit here?
Would you ask prior to communion if they are in a state of grace?
No, never. I heard Kelly say never do that. Right?
You just go ahead.
Isn't it about, again, it's about bringing God's presence. If they feel like they're not in a state of grace, and they're a Catholic with a conscience, they might say, you know, I don't want to receive today. Thank you. Can we just have